If you have a management consulting interview coming up, you should know that consulting has a huge emphasis on the behavioral part of the interview, as well as different firms have very specific instructions that they like you to follow for casing. Today we have Isabella Baldwin. She's one of our head mentors and a current associate at AT Kearney, otherwise known as ATK. We're going to walk through a mock interview using actual Kearney consulting interview questions. So stay tuned till the very end where she gives her top tips on how to be a standout candidate and how to really crush those case interviews. Hi, Bella. Thank you for doing this mock interview with us.
Thank you, Annie. I'm happy to be here.
So we just gave a quick intro on you, and I know you just came back from work, so really appreciate your time. And you bring tons of experience in management consulting. So I'm really excited to get to know more about you and also watch you walk through an actual case, because as you know, I come from a banking background, no experience in management consulting. And as we were talking earlier, it was just fascinating to see, how your brain works as you're thinking about all these pieces of the case. All right.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah. So before we get started with the actual mock interview, is there anything you want to share with our students, just so, they get a sense of what to watch for in this, 15, 20-minute interview? Because as I understand it, most of the consulting interviews are an hour long. Is that right?
About an hour. So you're looking at 45 minutes to 1 hour for your consulting interview. And it's going to be, it depends on the firm. For my firm and other firms like it, we're looking at a 50-50 split between your behavioral and your case interview. And don't be surprised if you're getting along really, really well with your interviewer, because the behavioral is always the first thing that we do. And they suddenly cut you short and say, okay, actually, we've got to move on to the case. It's literally just a time thing. So just be aware. Don't be put off by that. And what you'll notice, so consulting case interviews, like I said, it's 50% behavioral and 50% a formal structured case interview, and the elements of which you need to hit. So what you'll see is you'll have your behavioral interview, and you'll get asked the sort of 7 questions or whatever that firm's version of those are, plus a few extras by the interviewer. And then they'll say, okay, great, let's move on to the case interview. And that's when you're going to notice a real tone shift. It's going to go from, you're developing rapport with another human being to that person will then take on the role, and they'll tell you this, they'll take on the role of either a senior partner in the firm or the CEO or lead client of the fictitious company you're about to get a case interview question on. And you just need to be prepared for that tone shift, and you need to adjust your own persona accordingly. So you'll switch from being quite conversational to quite formal. And that's a good thing. And that's what you need to be prepared for.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that context. So,
Okay.
Bella, tell me a little bit more about you.
So I'm a farm girl from rural Queensland in Australia. You name it, I can drive it. I grew up working on trucks and tractors and headers and right in the middle of like the rural Queensland countryside. And when I got old enough for high school, I'm from such a rural area that there are actually no high schools where I grew up. So I had to go to boarding school for high school, which is really a really weird thing to tell people from different countries, because in Australia, boarding school is one of those things where the government have heavily subsidized farmers' kids, so it's not a snob thing. I always want to be very clear about that. And boarding school was amazing because it was the first time in my life where I could play any sport, not just the two that were offered at my small rural primary school. And I could take on any subject that was interesting to me, like drama and music and film and TV and history. And I absolutely loved school. Fast forward to the end of high school, and I get offered an incredible scholarship to go to law school as an undergrad, which was absolutely crazy. But I had a secret ambition to be a soldier, and I was honestly prepared to throw the whole thing away to join the Australian Army full time. And that's when I discovered two very awkward things when I made a secret appointment at my hometown's Defence Force Recruiting Centre. I found out two things. The first thing I found out, I was 16 years old at this point in time, about to graduate. Worth mentioning, I graduated at 17. That's a quirk of the Queensland schooling system. I discovered that one, I would need my parental consent to join the army, which would not be forthcoming because they were very proud of the fact that I got into law school. And two, I was a girl, and the job that I wanted to do in the army at that point in time wasn't available to women. So, quite disheartened, I went off to law school, which is not a bad thing. I had a great time at university. I interned for the Queensland Prisoners Legal Service, where I spent a lot of time in prisons around prisoners and doing a lot of prison advisory stuff with people coming up for parole. And then from there, I packed up all my belongings and moved to the Northern Territory, where I decided I didn't want to be a lawyer. And I spent 3 years in the sort of remote part of the Northern Territory outback as a rural journalist for the ABC, which was an amazing job. And then saved up all my money and moved to London. So I've spent some time in London. I've gotten into London Business School, and now it's my ambition to graduate into consulting.
Okay, so I mean, you've got a quite diverse background, experiences in law, and then obviously the interest in defense. Why consulting?
That's a really great question. So, I've had the privilege of working for a number of really amazing corporate organizations in both in Australia and in the UK. And I think the thing that really threw me as a young person, I own this, is because I wanted to join the army. There were a few other setbacks. So I had a knee injury that prevented me from joining the army full time, but I still ended up joining the Army Reserves, and that's a whole other conversation we can have. And when you determine what you want to do with your life, and factors completely beyond your control take that away from you, it does take a little bit of time to adjust and pivot and figure out what you want to do next. So during this period, I went from journalism to communications and project management, and I had some incredible jobs with Bank of America, the BBC, and Marks and Spencer. And during that time, I spent a lot of time with people in my Army Reserve unit who were consultants. And that's when I first got interested in management consulting. And the thing that really attracted me to consulting were the things that I loved. There were elements of my corporate jobs that I really liked, and there were elements that really weren't for me. And I figured out two things. So the first thing I figured out was that I get bored very easily if things aren't moving really quickly and the problems to be solved aren't really huge, and I'm not around people who are super motivated. So that was the sort of first thing I realized about myself. And the second thing I realized about myself is that I just like solving problems. And when the problem is solved, I'm happy to do like the implementation, but I want to teach a man to fish, not give a man a fish. So, and that to me is the consulting really is that perfect cross section of it is hard, it's fast, everyone's motivated, ambitious. And then on the other side, it's problem solving after problem solving after problem solving, and helping people implement solutions that you've designed, and then you get to go solve a new problem. So that for me, that's been the attraction to consulting.
Yes, I love that. I think you'll find a lot of that here at ATK. Um,
Yes.
so that brings me to my next question, just based on the people that you've talked to and just what you know about the firm, why ATK?
So Kearney is brilliant in the sense that it's across, there's 40 offices in 40 different countries. And that to me, just that breadth of international exposure is joining a firm that has that level of international exposure is really, really exciting. But I am particularly impressed by two things about Kearney. So the first thing I really like is how democratized it is at partner level. And my understanding of Kearney's partner structure is that one partner equals one vote. And that sort of democracy is a really interesting way to run a firm. And I think that's led to a lot of success in each of the offices around the world. And the second, so it seems like partners have a real opportunity to, make their mark as leaders. And the partners that I've met from Kearney were really inspiring people. So I really liked that element of Kearney's culture from what I've observed from the outside. And the second thing is industry. So Kearney is one of the few firms that does defense really well. And defense is the industry that I'm most passionate about. So I'm really hoping to get stuck into Kearney and get stuck into a defense project as soon as possible.
Yeah, amazing. I want to talk about your past engagements in any consulting or strategy related role, and just tell me about what your role was in that engagement, and then any other details that you want to include.
Yeah, sure thing. So, when I was new to the Northern Territory, just before I joined the ABC, I was privileged enough to work for 6 months on a major Australian government project, which was transforming the entire state's health IT systems. Like these are 25-year-old beyond end of life patient data systems that were at risk of like catastrophic failure at any given day. And it was a $180 million software acquisition and rollout program that I was working on, and my job was as the communications manager. And I want to preface this by saying that it was basically my first job after graduating university. I moved to the territory because the job opportunities were exploding, and I basically walked into this interview. I said in my interview that I'd never actually done this before, and they were like, yeah, you'll be fine. And I got chucked straight in the deep end. I 10 out of 10, if you're an undergrad and you wanna progress quickly, go somewhere crazy, as opposed to a big city. So I took over the communications strategy manager role for a major multi-million dollar program at the age of 22.
Wow.
And and my job was twofold. One, I had to learn what a communications manager actually did, so that was a fast way to upskill. And two, I had to develop the communication strategy that would convince 30,000 healthcare workers that this was a good idea. So that was my introduction into strategy. Do you want me to talk about how I did that?
Yeah, what results did you get out of that experience?
So the first thing I learned was you can split communications management into sort of three factors. So one is the overarching goal. What is the ultimate goal? What do you want people to think, feel, and do? And that is your North Star when it comes to communications on any project. And two was learning how to segment audiences, because healthcare workers aren't the same type of audience. A doctor in a rural hospital is a very different beast to a doctor in a city hospital versus a physio versus a frontline healthcare worker versus emergency services versus back end administrative patient staff. So understanding audience segments, including government ministers, is the next problem you've got to tackle. And then you've got to develop two things. You've got to develop your channels, your cadence of messaging, and your type of messaging, keeping the ultimate goal in mind. And what I developed was a strategy that encompassed every communication channel that I had that could be made available to me. So that was everything from understanding like massive newsletter distribution lists that went statewide to understanding ministerial talking points for television news, to drilling right down to what hospitals had staff room notice boards that I could pin things to, and how could I find someone to pin something in a part of the state that was a 7-hour drive away. So that was really how I tackled it. Can't really go into too much detail about what the messaging was and all that kind of stuff, because a lot of it's still
Right.
quite confidential. But that was my first intro into strategy.
Okay, lovely. And then I've got one more question for you before we hop into the case. Tell me about a time when you had difficulty working with a manager and how you dealt with that situation.
Okay, I think another really great example probably comes from that time when I was working this government job, because just to give you some context, I spent a lot of time as a journalist, but journalism is very much you've got a central coordinator, but everyone just gets sent out constantly on assignments. So the frictions that you get, and not saying that there aren't any frictions, there's a lot of frictions. When you get a lot of creative people in a room, there's going to be frictions, but not so much managerial ones, because it's actually quite process driven. But I remember a time when a key concern raised by a number of healthcare workers was the potential for a lot of critical patient data to be lost when they transferred from one system to another. And when it comes to healthcare workers, you've got to remember these people care deeply about their patients. In a lot of cases, these are people that they've been treating for 10 years, 20 years, almost 30 years. They've been treating somebody, and they want to make sure that us corporate decision makers who aren't healthcare providers, they wanted the assurance that we were keeping that top of mind. And so I developed a piece of newsletter communication that was in direct response to a question that had been asked to us at a number of town halls that we'd gone to. And it was a really honest assessment of this is the risk that we've identified of patient data being lost and how we plan to salvage it. And it was quite easy. We were going to have a backup system where that would be live for 5 years. So if anything happened, like there'd essentially be a gigantic cloud-based system somewhere with this data on it. But there would be a data transfer process that we were still testing, and we would be testing it in small batches to make 100% sure it worked before we, hit the switch and made the whole thing live.
All right, thank you for sharing that. We're gonna move on to the case study part.
Sure.
So for this portion, I'm gonna be the CEO of a paper cup company for coffee. And we supply to major coffee chains and restaurants in the US. And over the past year or so, over the past 12 months, our profitability have dropped about 25%, so fairly significant, even though revenues have been pretty constant. No, the problem that we're trying to solve here is we want to know what is causing the decline, and then obviously how to fix it.
Thank you so much. I've got a couple of questions for you, if I may, before we
Yep,
move on.
sure.
So has volume and pricing remained consistent?
Um, yes, so volume-wise, we generally sell roughly 10 million units per year. Pricing is about 10 cents per unit, and then our revenue it's stable around 1 million year over year.
Okay. And are there any external market shifts that could explain the drop in profits?
Not that we're aware of. No.
Okay. And could you talk to me about the cost components? So, have there been any increases to your costs?
Yes. So in terms of fixed cost, fixed costs have been pretty stable, 200K year over year. Variable cost last year was 5 cents per unit, and then this year it's risen 2 cents, so 7 cents.
Okay. Can you just give me 60 seconds, just so I can get my thoughts in order, and then we can work through a solution for this problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. So at that point, I would take 60 seconds to work out my framework. Instantly, when you get a question like this, you know that this is a profitability case. So, right. So I've asked those questions because the first thing I heard when the client was giving the question prompt were profits down and revenue remaining flat. So instantly I know that this is a profitability case. And there are really two major elements to a profitability case, right? It's revenue and costs. Based off the clarifying questions I've asked the client, I know that this is most likely going to be a cost issue. So I've worked out a framework and I'm going to explain my framework to the client. Okay. Right. So based off what you've told me, my hypothesis is that since profits are down while revenues remain fairly flat, the issue is likely cost. And so I'd like to focus on the following cost levers, if I may. So first, I'd like to take a look at your fixed costs and understand if there's been any major issues there. The second thing I'd like to take a look at is your variable costs. And across your variable costs, I would like to examine your raw materials, your manufacturing costs, and any increases to your logistics, things like shipping, things like factory maintenance, etc. So before examining any other variables like revenue trends or any other external factors, I'd like to start with cost. Is there anything based off what I've said that you would like to explore further?
Yeah, let's focus on cost. I've actually got some data here for you.
Oh, fantastic. All right, let's take a look. So at that point, it might be worth just for the sake of this, just having an image of the data there, and that's all that would be required. Okay, so I can talk through that. Okay, so the data that I'm looking at is actually let's start again. I need to bring up the data. Okay, so the data that I'm looking at is the revenue and volume, the costs, and last year's profit versus this year's profit. So I know that they've been selling 10 million units a year, that it's been a million in revenue. So I'm going to focus my math on the cost. So I'm going to look at the fixed costs and the variable costs. So the key thing here is that the fixed costs haven't changed. So I can instantly see that it's $200,000 a year, but the variable cost has increased from 5 cents a unit to 7 cents a unit. So from there, I'm going to work out the price per unit over 10 million units sold, and I'm going to subtract this year's variable cost. Correction, I'm going to subtract last year's variable cost from this year's variable cost. And doing that very simple equation will yield, let's have a look. So if last year's total variable costs were 5 cents times 10 million, we're looking at 500,000 in variable costs. If this year's variable costs, it's simple math, it was 7 cents times 10 million, we're looking at 700,000 in variable costs. So I can identify that there has been a 200,000 US dollar increase in total variable costs. I'll take a quick look at last year's profit and this year's profit, and I can identify that the profit drop has been from 300,000 down to 100,000. So that's a 200,000 profit drop. And I would talk through my math as I'm working through it to my interviewer. So based off the numbers that you've given me, I can see that the entire profit decrease is due to an increase in your variable costs. So having worked through the math, I'm going to say now to the interviewer, so based off the information that you've given me, I can see that the entire profit decline is due to an increase in variables of cost per unit. Does that sound right?
Yes, I think variable cost is what we should be focused on.
Excellent. And in order to examine variable costs, can you just give me 60 seconds while I jot down some points, and then we can discuss what to do next?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay, so at this point in the interview, I'm looking at variable costs, and I'm going to take a tactical pause to jot down a bullet list of the various cost levers that we can examine. So you should have that time in your interview. But cost levers are things like suppliers, waste, etc. So those are the things I'm going to talk through with my interviewer. Right. So I'd like to examine the following. So I would like to begin looking at your suppliers and understanding what your raw material costs are. I'd then like to look at whether there are some costs that we can pass on to the customer by increasing the price per unit that we sell at. And finally, I would like to examine whether there are any opportunities to adjust the product design. So whether we can explore alternative materials or perhaps producing different ranges of paper cups.
Yeah,
So
I don't
the
think
one
we can pass any of the costs to our customers, but just as you're saying it, we've had the same supplier for 10 years.
Okay. So based off what we've discussed, and at this point in the interview, if there's no other data provided, then I can talk through recommendations. So I would recommend looking at the cost levers, and I would recommend beginning with your supplier costs. And I would recommend starting with one, examining your raw materials and understanding if there are any different suppliers to your raw materials. If you've got the same supplier for 10 years, it may be that they haven't adjusted their pricing, and there may be other players out there worth negotiating contracts with. So if additional suppliers or alternative suppliers aren't an appropriate course of action, I would strongly recommend we start by negotiating the existing contracts with your suppliers. And you've got a strong position in the sense that you've been a loyal customer for 10 years and you are a reliable customer. So there may be elements of the contract that we can negotiate to bring the cost of raw materials down. And finally, outside of your suppliers, I would like to examine your waste in production and see if there's any ways that we can reduce waste there.
Excellent. And of all of those, what would you prioritize as the most important thing we can act on right now?
I think the quickest win is negotiating your existing supplier contracts. So it's always worth looking at other suppliers, but if you currently have this year's crop of paper cups under production, starting with supplier costs from your existing suppliers could be an easy win.
Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you for that. And with that, Bella, we're going to wrap up the interview. Um, I want to make sure that we give you some time also to have any closing thoughts on our students. Sometimes they're heading into these interviews with a lot of prep, casing, and really creating their own brand and how they stand out. Just based off of the students that you've coached, do you have any tips or advice, best practices for folks heading into these interviews?
Yeah, so there are three things that I recommend you do. And the first thing I didn't quite do in this interview, but always look for ways to give bonus information in your case. So if we're talking profitability and we're talking cost, always make sure you throw out after your next steps. You can say, after we've done these next steps, always suggest a couple of things that weren't mentioned in the case, just to demonstrate to the interviewer that you're creative enough and your thinking is flexible enough. Always throw out bonuses, even if you didn't crack the case, even if the case didn't go super well. Deliver your recommendations and your next steps, and then throw out bonus materials. So for that one, I could have said something along the lines of developing premium products, different types of paper cups, or investing in automated manufacturing, for example. Like those are some of the things that you don't need to know that much about the industry to throw out some bonus material. And that tells the interviewer that you can think laterally. The second thing that I coach candidates through all the time is everyone gets so wrapped around the axles of solving the case and cracking the case and giving perfect case interviews. And they completely forget that the behavioral interview is 50% of why I'm recommending you for the next stage. So don't neglect your behavioral interview practice. And the reason for this is consulting is people focused and client focused. We need to know that you are sociable enough that we can put you in front of a client tomorrow and the client's not going to find you off-putting. That's really important. And the other thing is consulting is so travel heavy. I know I have to, in the back of my mind when I'm speaking to you, one of the questions and selfish questions your interviewer is going to be asking themselves is, can I sit next to this person for 4 hours on a plane, like week in, week out? Am I going to dread having to sit in a waiting room with them while the client's running an hour late? Am I going to be able to have like interesting conversations with this person late at night, eating a takeaway dinner in a crappy hotel? Like these are the things that your interviewer is going to be asking themselves. So do invest the time in developing your people skills and your ability to build rapport, because that's really important. And the third thing is hobbies. Every case interview, like every consulting interview, you're going to get asked, like, what are your interests? What are your passions? What are your hobbies? It's a genuine question. The person talking to you really does want to know the answer. And I can always tell when someone's giving me an answer that they think I want to hear. So if you tell me that your hobbies are reading the Financial Times and following the markets, and they may well be things that you're interested in, but I'm instantly going to be like, come on, no, it's not. If you tell me though that you're passionate about Formula One, I don't care about Formula One, but I want to know why you're passionate about Formula One, and we can have a great conversation there. And you will, when you're talking about something you're passionate about, you will light up, and it will instantly put the interviewer in a good frame of mind about you. If you've got weird interests like historical romance novels or pickleball or whatever it may be, like mention those weird things to your interviewer. It makes you memorable, and you yourself will light up when you talk about that. So, and that will be powerful for your interviewer to observe about you.
Well, now that you're mentioning that, I do have a question because I get asked this sometimes. It's like, yeah, be genuine, be true to, what you're passionate about. Is there a line where it gets too weird? How would you
Ah.
get that line?
That's a good question because it's never happened. No one's ever got, like, to be honest, no one's ever gotten too weird in an interview for me. I think, look, for any interview, steer clear of being too personal. Like everyone's got stuff going on in the background that in a professional setting, nobody really needs to know about off the bat. This is not the place to talk about your childhood trauma, or the fact that dad doesn't love you. This is weird hobbies are fine, but tragic family dynamics maybe not so much, or anything that keep it positive. So don't talk about your phobias, don't talk about things that disgust you, don't talk about things that make you angry. These are all things that you can talk about with your colleagues over the water cooler, but keep those things outside of the interview.
Yeah, got it. So I guess what you're getting at, not I guess we're seeing a pattern here for banking or management consulting or any other industry is that you're really talking about the passion, right? The passion that you're bringing into that space, the thing you really enjoy. It's not really about the thing that you're talking about, but we want to see if you really get passionate about something, like how involved are you? You know, you light up, you show the enthusiasm. Um, but it's not, it's not about being weird or being unique. It's really about what are you interested in that you can convey. And now we can tie that passion to, okay, great. When you're passionate about your work, that same level of enthusiasm comes out and you'd be a wonderful to work with.
Exactly. You've hit the nail on the head. It's consulting is a human industry, first and foremost. We're not dealing with numbers and ones and zeros. We're dealing with people. And oftentimes the person that you're dealing with is a very smart person in a company or a government agency or an organization, who knows a lot about their subject matter, and they've come to you for help. And they need to trust that you have their best interests, and they need to trust that you're a human being. And I think that you're a human being is the really important thing. They don't want automatons, like that they can talk to ChatGPT, but you're
Yes,
really
right.
a human and help them solve their problem.
Okay. Well, excellent. Thank you so much, Bella, for your time. And I'll be sending a lot of my students your way.
Thank you so much.
All right, thanks.